Sometimes a person disappears. They vanish into the wilderness, leaving behind only emptiness and unanswered questions. But Jonathan Moore's story is different. He also disappeared, but 7 years later he was found. And the way he was found turns the tragic tale of a missing tourist into something much darker and more disturbing. This is not just a story about disappearance, but about how human bones can tell a story that will make your blood run cold. A story about how, in the wildest and most untouched corners of our country, there may be something that does not fit into our understanding of the world, and the authorities will do everything to ensure that you never find out about it. In October 2016, 38-year-old Jonathan Moore, a software engineer from Charlotte, North Carolina, decided to spend 3 days hiking alone. He chose Shining Rock State Park, one of the most beautiful and wildest places in the Appalachians, as the destination for his trip. It is nearly 8,500 acres of untouched wilderness, known for its quartz rocks that glisten in the sun and dense forests. Moore was no novice. On the contrary, his friends and family described him as a highly methodical and experienced hiker. He always planned his route carefully, carried all the necessary equipment, including a satellite communicator, and never took unnecessary risks. His plan was simple: a 3-day loop starting at the Blue Ridge Parkway, with overnight stays in a tent. He sent his sister a photo from the starting point of the route on the morning of Friday, October 14th. The message was short and positive. "I'm off. The weather is great. I'll be in touch on Sunday evening." That was the last message anyone received from Jonathan Moore. When he didn't get in touch on Sunday evening, his family didn't immediately raise the alarm. Sometimes the signal goes out in the mountains and plans can be delayed a little. But when he didn't show up for work on Monday morning, his sister immediately contacted the Haywood County Rescue Service. The search operation began that same day. Rescue workers, volunteers, and search dogs comb the Shining Rock area. The terrain there is rugged. Trails disappear into thick rhododendron thickets and then emerge onto open rocky plateaus where the weather can change in a matter of minutes. The first 2 days of searching yielded absolutely nothing. There were no traces of a camp, no abandoned equipment, not even a wrapper from an energy bar. Jonathan Moore seemed to have vanished into thin air. His car remained untouched in the parking lot at the trailhead. On the 3rd day of the search, when hope was beginning to fade, one of the search parties made the first, and, as it turned out, the last discovery. About 1.5 miles from Moore's presumed route, off the trail in thick underbrush, they found his trekking pole. But the way it was found puzzled and alarmed the experienced rescuers. The stick was not lying on the ground as if it had been dropped. It was stuck vertically into the ground with such force that the carbon fiber shaft had penetrated the dense, rocky soil nearly a foot deep. The handle stuck up like a flagpole. One of the veteran search and rescue workers, Mark Caldwell, later said in an informal conversation with a local journalist, "I've been working in the mountains for 20 years. I've seen it all. People fall and they break their equipment. But this was wrong. To stick a stick into the ground like that, you'd need superhuman strength or weight. It was as if someone or something weighing several hundred kilograms had swung it down from above. We checked around. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no footprints, except ours. Just this stick sticking out of the ground, like a gravestone." This discovery provided no answers, only new questions. Why would someone drive a stick into the ground with such force? If Moore had done it himself, what was the purpose? Was it a signal? But then why didn't he leave any other signs? If it was an accident, where was Jonathan? A search within a few miles of the site yielded nothing. The dogs lost the trail. Thermal imaging cameras used from a helicopter showed nothing but wild animals. The active search continued for another 2 weeks, after which it was called off. Jonathan Moore was officially declared missing. For his family, years of agonizing uncertainty began. Various theories were put forward, ranging from a bear attack to a criminal incident involving other tourists or residents. But none of them explained the strange discovery of the trekking pole and the complete absence of any other traces. Jonathan Moore's story gradually became one of the many mysteries of the Appalachians. This continued for almost 7 years. 7 years of silence, until a group of local enthusiasts decided to descend into one of the abandoned mines, a legacy of the mining fever of the 19th century. They had no idea that their curiosity would put an end to this silence and give rise to a new, far more sinister twist to the story. It was April 2023. 3 young people, Caleb, Liam, and Chloe, known in their circles as diggers or urban explorers, were exploring abandoned sites in the Haywood area. They weren't interested in tourist trails, but in forgotten relics of the past, old farms, abandoned industrial buildings, and of course, mines. That day, their destination was the old Iron Mountain ore mine, which had been closed at the end of the 19th century. The entrance was barely visible, a narrow crack in the rock, hidden behind thick undergrowth and scree. Officially, the mine was considered long, collapsed, and dangerous. This is precisely what attracted the explorers. Once inside, they found themselves in a narrow, hand-cut tunnel. The air was stuffy and heavy, smelling of damp earth and rotting wood, the remains of old supports. The beams of their powerful headlamps picked out rusty rails embedded in the ground and traces of pickaxes on the walls. They advanced slowly and cautiously, marking their way and checking the ceiling for collapses. The mine was deeper than they had expected. The central shaft went down and side tunnels branched off from it, many of which were flooded or blocked. About an hour after descending, at a depth of about 60 meters, they sensed a change. The air became even heavier, and the smell of dampness was mixed with a faint, strange, organic aroma. It was not like the smell of decay or carrion. Caleb later described it as sweetish, chemical, like the smell of ammonia mixed with something like wet river clay. They decided to check one of the side tunnels, which looked more stable than the others. After walking about 30 meters, they came to a dead end, the face where the miners' work had once ended. It was there, in the farthest corner of this dead end, that Chloe's flashlight beam caught something white in the darkness. At first, they thought it was a quartz vein or just a piece of debris, but as they got closer, they froze. On a thin layer of damp dirt, pressed against the wall, lay a human skeleton. The first thing that caught their eye was the posture. The skeleton was lying in a fetal position. The knees were pulled up to the chest, and the arms were folded in front of the face. This was not the posture of a person who had died in their sleep. It was the posture of a person who had tried to hide, to make themselves as small as possible, to disappear. The second and most shocking thing was the condition of the remains. The bones were completely clean. There was not a single piece of flesh, tendon, or even cartilage. They were smooth, almost polished, and yellowish white in color. Liam, who knew a little about biology, immediately noticed the strangest thing: the complete absence of any traces of rodents or insects. In a place like a mine, any carrion would have been immediately eaten by rats, mice, and burying beetles. Their traces, minor scratches and gnaw marks on the bones, would have been inevitable. But here the bones were perfectly intact. It was as if the flesh had not rotted or been eaten, but dissolved or cut off with something exact and sharp. The most gruesome detail was the skull. It had been turned upside down. The face was turned inward, toward the spine, as if at the last moment of his life, the man had not looked outward at the threat, but had buried his face in his chest, or else his head had been turned that way after death. Caleb, overcoming his initial shock, decided to document the find on camera. Careful not to disturb anything, he approached the remains. When he shone the light under the skull, he noticed something else in the dirt beneath it, a dark, shiny spot like dried slime. It was translucent and had a strange, fibrous structure. The guys realized that they had stumbled upon something more than just the remains of a lost tourist. They immediately stopped their investigation, carefully returned to the surface, and contacted the police. They gave the sheriff the coordinates of the mine and the photos they had taken with their camera. The next day, an investigation team and a coroner arrived at the site. The mine was cordoned off. The remains were carefully removed and sent for examination. Soon, confirmation came. Dental records identified the skeleton as Jonathan Moore, who had been missing for 7 years. For the family, it was both a relief and the beginning of a new nightmare, because the coroner's report, which was only partially leaked to the press, contained details that the Haywood County Police Department would have preferred to keep hidden forever. The official conclusion, which was provided to the Moore family and the press, was dry and concise. It stated that Jonathan Moore's remains had been found, and that the cause of death could not be determined due to severe tissue decomposition. The case was closed, but the full report, intended for internal use, and later obtained by a journalist through an anonymous source, painted a very different picture. The forensic expert, Dr. Alan Carter, a man with an impeccable reputation and 30 years of experience, was faced with a mystery that defied logical explanation. In his report, he methodically listed the anomalies. First, complete absence of soft tissue and cartilage while the skeleton remained intact. He emphasized that natural decomposition, in the conditions of the mine, constant temperature, high humidity, would have left traces of cartilage and tendons on the bones even after 7 years. Here, however, the skeleton was as clean as an anatomical model. Second, and most important, no traces of scavengers. Dr. Carter specifically pointed out that microscopic examinations of the bone surface had been carried out. No scratches from rodent teeth or traces of insect scavengers, in particular the Sylphidae or Staphylinidae families, that should have been present in this environment were found. Instead, the surface of the bones had an unusual smoothness, which the expert described as the effect of chemical polishing or scraping. In one of his notes, he wrote, "The condition of the bones most closely resembles the result of treatment with an alkali or acid solution, but without the demineralization of bone tissue characteristic of such treatment. The bone structure is intact." This was a scientific description of the impossible. Flesh had disappeared without a trace and without damaging what was underneath it. The third point concerned a strange mucus substance, a sample of which was taken from under the skull. Chemical analysis revealed the presence of a complex protein structure, but the most striking thing was something else. The report stated, "The protein compounds identified have no analogs in the databases of known terrestrial animals, both vertebrates and invertebrates. The structure of the amino acid chain has anomalies that are not characteristic of Earth's fauna." In the official version, this was attributed to possible contamination of the sample with organic matter from the external environment or the waste products of unknown microorganisms. But in Carter's private notes, which were leaked along with the report, there was a phrase, "This is not contamination. This is a trace of what left this body here." While the authorities tried to cover up these inconvenient facts, the 3 diggers who found the body were experiencing their horror. Back home, Caleb decided to review the video footage taken in the mine. He wanted to take another look at the site before the police arrived. Rewinding the recording, he paused at the moment when they had just entered the side tunnel where they later found the skeleton. At that moment, he was holding the camera, smoothly scanning the walls and ceiling. His flashlight was the most powerful one, and at some point, for just a few seconds, he pointed the beam to the very end of the tunnel, where it hit the wall. At that moment, they couldn't see anything yet, and just kept walking forward. But on the recording, when played back in slow motion, and with the brightness turned up to the max, there was movement. It wasn't just light and shadow. In the very depths of the tunnel, where the light from the flashlight barely reached, something tall and thin appeared for a split second from behind a rock ledge. It did not look like a human. Judging by its proportions and the shadow it cast on the wall, it was at least 2.5 meters tall. It swayed, made one smooth, silent movement, and disappeared again into the absolute darkness of a side branch they hadn't even noticed. The movement was inhuman, too soft and fast for such a large creature. It moved on 2 limbs, but its silhouette was elongated, with long, thin arms, and most importantly, it wore no clothes and had no hair. It was utterly dark, absorbing light. Caleb froze. They weren't alone as they walked toward Jonathan Moore's remains, a few meters away, in the darkness. Something stood there, watching. It didn't make a sound. It didn't reveal itself. It was just there. The guys realized that the police needed to know about this. They contacted the sheriff's office and told them about their video discovery. The reaction was unexpected. They were immediately summoned to the station, where they were questioned not by local police officers, but by 2 men in plain clothes who identified themselves as federal agents. They confiscated the original memory card with the video, calling it material evidence in an ongoing investigation. They were strongly advised not to discuss the details of the coroner's report or the contents of the video with anyone, citing respect for the family of the deceased and the secrecy of the investigation. The video recording was never added to the case file. It simply disappeared. So, what do we have? An experienced tourist disappears, leaving behind a single strange clue, a stick stuck in the ground. 7 years later, his perfectly preserved skeleton is found in an abandoned mine in a position of terror. The forensic expert records anomalies that natural causes cannot explain. The flesh seems to have dissolved without a trace, and biological material found under the skull has no analogs on Earth. Finally, there is a video recording of a tall, 2-legged creature in the same mine, which the authorities were quick to hide. If you put all these facts together, discard the mysticism and the supernatural, and try to find a logical, biological explanation, a monstrous hypothesis emerges. We are not talking about a ghost or a demon. We are talking about a predator. The Appalachian Mountains are one of the oldest mountain ranges on the planet. Beneath them lies a vast and largely unexplored network of caves and karst voids. What if, in this underground ecosystem isolated from the outside world for millions of years, its apex predator has evolved, a creature perfectly adapted to life in total darkness? Its height and long limbs are adaptations for moving through narrow tunnels and vertical shafts. The absence of eyes or their rudimentary state is compensated for by other, more developed senses, perhaps echolocation, like bats, or a heightened sense of smell capable of detecting the scent of a living creature from a great distance. Its silence is a key element of hunting in a confined space. The most terrifying, and at the same time logical explanation for the condition of Moore's remains is a unique method of digestion. This predator does not tear its prey apart like a bear or a cougar. It may immobilize it and then secrete a powerful digestive enzyme, the very slime whose traces were found under the skull. This enzyme quickly dissolves soft tissues, turning them into a nutritious broth, which the creature then sucks up. This explains everything: the perfectly clean bones, the absence of rodent tracks, and the specific chemical smell that the diggers smelled. It is a waste-free and efficient way of feeding in an environment where food may be scarce. Now let's reconstruct the last hours of Jonathan Moore's life. He left the trail, perhaps to find a place to camp or to explore the area. He may have stumbled upon one of the inconspicuous entrances to this cave system. The creature, disturbed or attracted by his scent, came to the surface. Jonathan saw it. The trekking pole stuck in the ground is not a signal. It is a trace of a desperate last-ditch attempt to defend itself. Perhaps he had struck the creature, and it, possessing enormous strength, had torn the stick out of his hands and driven it into the ground with a swing. Or perhaps he had stuck it there in panic, trying to hold on to something as he was dragged into the darkness. He was dragged into the shaft, into the depths of this underground system. Alive. The fetal position in which his skeleton was found and the upturned skull speak of the last moments of unspeakable horror. He sat in the corner, trying to shield himself from whatever was approaching him in the absolute darkness, and died when it began to digest him. The authorities' concealment of information in this context also seems perfectly logical. Imagine the panic that would ensue if it became known that an unknown species of large predator-hunting humans was living in one of the country's most popular tourist regions. Economic collapse for the entire region, mass hysteria, and demands to launch a full-scale military operation underground, which is technically impossible. It is much easier to write it off as an accident, close the case, and remove inconvenient evidence, such as video recordings under the seal of secrecy. Jonathan Moore's story is not just a tragedy. It is a terrible warning. We consider ourselves the masters of the planet, but we live only on its thin shell. And what lies beneath our feet, in a world without light or time, we may never know. Until one day, someone else strays from the path and looks into the darkness, where something hungry is already staring back at them.